Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live show of Activista Rise Up, Wine, Women, and Politics, a post-election analysis of the 2020 elections from the point of view of women, women of color, and grassroots women leaders. If you are like me, stressed out, worried about the future of our democracy, and you want to be inspired about how we are going to survive this moment of crisis and how we're going to build from it, please join us. We're going to be discussing what happened in New Jersey, what's happening nationally, how we're going to make our voices heard, and be inspired by how we are working hand to hand with our communities and leading our leaders in our community to make their voices heard through the political process. I am Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina, and today I am so proud to host a group of amazing women who I have the pleasure to work with in many of our issues that are so important to women of color and to progressive women in New Jersey. My first guest, and yes, please get a glass of wine and join us. This is a discussion. You can ask questions on the chat box and we will try to answer them. But my first guest is a dear friend of mine, someone who I admire very much because of what she's able to do while staying true to who she is. Arlene Quinones Perez. She's the chair of Hunterdon County Democrats and the only Latina chair of any county in New Jersey. She's also the chair of the Latino Caucus of the New Jersey State Democratic Committee and a fellow board member of Lupe PAC, an organization that is advancing the interests of Latinas and helping them run for office and win. Thank you, Arlene, for joining me. My next guest is also a fierce woman of color who is out there speaking truth to power. You heard her here before, and I'm so excited that she's gonna come join me and offer her view on what happened during these elections. Imani Oakley, the leader of New Jersey Progressive Democrats and the host of Up From Now, Eyes on New Jersey. Thank you, Imani, for coming back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Cheers. Yes, cheers. I also have a very impressive woman leader who has built a grassroots organization mobilizing women across New Jersey. Khuong, Executive Director of Action Together of New Jersey, and a fierce voice for women progressives across New Jersey and nationally. Thank you, Uyen, for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here. And I'm not doing wine because I'm about to fall asleep, so I'll do wine.
Well, I am glad you're here and join us. Like I said, if you have wine, you can have a seltzer water or you can have some tequila if that's what someone wants to have.
Girl, I go hard with the whiskey. I'm not going to lie.
My next guest is an amazing and inspiring young woman who is a leader on her own right. Quispe, a labor leader and immigrant rights activist in New Jersey, who I am so proud to have seen her develop and grow and is now leading so many of our campaigns, organizing immigrant workers and low-wage workers in New Jersey. So thank you, Emmy, for joining me.
Hi, Patricia. Good evening. Hi, Arlene, Uyen, Imani. It's a pleasure to be with you all and everyone on Facebook as well. Similar to Uyen, I'm not doing wine tonight, but I did a tip on my Facebook post recently where I hope everyone watching does have a glass of wine with them. It's a humbling honor to be here today and to do the work that we're all doing in the grounds right now.
Yes. So, yes, you don't have to have wine, but you can ask us questions on Facebook. So please, before I get started, how are you all feeling? It's been like a roller coaster for me. I'm all stressed out because I never thought that we would be in the United States with a president actually telling people to stop the count of the votes. So let's start there. How are you feeling, Arlene, where we are in this moment? Now, we won New Jersey, but we'll talk about New Jersey later. But how are you feeling about the national moment right now, Arlene?
We've been dealing with this election for a long time now. I mean, it's been years in the making, right? And so this is kind of just the point where we want to see results. So it's hard to be patient. It's hard to keep saying we need to wait for all the results to be counted, but that's exactly where we are. So I'm trying to check my own frustration and wanting to know where we're going to be in the next couple of days by making sure people understand that this is part of the process and that it's really rare that we actually should know what the election result is immediately, especially when hopefully in the future we're going to continue to make voting easier and easier, and we're going to continue to do VBMs. So I'm hoping that everyone, while we are frustrated, I think more at not the process, more about the individual involved in the process. This process is the way it's supposed to be. So I think the wine helps. Quite a bit. And I'm proud for when we can talk about Jersey and Hunterdon County. So I'm excited to be with all you ladies too. It's nice to have this conversation with you guys.
Yes, I think that we knew what was going to happen if with Trump. He prepared the ground for the last 3 months to put doubts on voters about the results. So we sort of should have been prepared for this. But as always, I think the stress level of knowing that we won the vote, the popular vote, but we don't have the electoral vote, is very hard to explain in our communities. But it looks like Biden has a path to victory. We are so excited for that. I feel better. But that path to victory is dependent on Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and is highly dependent on support from voters of color. So, Imani, I'm gonna go to you because I know you get this. I've been so frustrated all day on Twitter defending the fact that Latinos are not the fault, are not the reason why Biden lost Florida. So we are the reason he's still in the game. So how do you respond to that, to some of that critique? It's not from every corner of the planet, of the United States, but that has been weighing on me all day. This argument that somehow no win in Florida was Latino voters, or no win in some other states is the fault of Black males who didn't vote for Biden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's honestly incredible. This happens every single presidential election, and you know what's funny about it? And I'll kind of parse the two because the excuses are a little bit different, or the blames comes out a little bit different for Latino voters and Black voters. But for Latino voters, there's a lot of last minute outreach, like, oh, we need you now, last minute, so now we'll talk to you. Trump has actually been preparing for this like way before. He's been preparing to talk to the Latino community in places like Florida where it really matters, literally for months, possibly even like a couple of years back, has been priming that area, right? And actually doing outreach. Whereas we see a Biden campaign that's picked up a lot, right, in the last few months or so, that they did actually start doing outreach. But that outreach has to be consistent. It has to be early. It cannot just be like, oh, well, kind of last minute, we need you now, so we'll come talk to you. That cannot happen. There really needs to be outreach to people of color, Latino communities, and then with Black communities, give us something to get excited about. Keep your promises to us. Black voters actually are very, very, are extremely reliable voting base for Democrats in the presidential, like extremely. Like our numbers are like high, above 80%, right? Like it's out of this world. But if there are less people coming out to vote, and you notice that, and if you're actually talking to folks and they're saying, well, I don't really like Biden as a candidate, or I don't really like that the Democratic Party hasn't delivered on X, Y, and Z, that's something that Democrats need to listen to and lean into, and not resort to kind of just like blaming them and treating them, frankly, like children. Like, how dare you not come out and vote when I tell you?
But the bottom line is, though, that Black voters voted, 87% of the national of Black voters voted for Biden. So we sort of deliver where we deliver at the levels that we always do. And Latinos nationally voted for Biden at 70%. So one loss in Florida should not determine where did we fall down in that actual support for the Democratic Party. But I want to move to Emmy. Emmy, you know, as an immigrant rights activist, as a woman in the labor movement, we have been doing a lot of work in places like Arizona and Nevada to turn the minority and the union vote, to turn those numbers. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between what it takes to turn out a voter of color in Florida and what it takes to turn a voter of color in Arizona and Nevada? Because they're two different types of Latino voters. They're not the same.
Yes, of course, Patricia. And I do want to answer first also about how we're feeling, right? I think we're all feeling differently from that 4 a.m. feeling on Wednesday morning to that feeling just a few hours later on that Wednesday afternoon. And, it's getting more hopeful each time. One of the things in my mind was how the Latino votes and how it changed drastically between, again, like say Florida and places like Nevada that it's turning now, and in Arizona. I think that our campaigns definitely should focus on Latinos but also see the cultural sensitivity in the Latino voters. See that there's different, Latinos don't vote all at once, don't vote all together for the same, or the topics are not the important topics of importance are not the same for everyone. Yes, immigration is key to us, but so is jobs, so is the economy, so is job securities and economy. We have to speak to the voting bloc that we're gearing to. Latinos in the border, down by the border, they also care about the economy, and we're seeing the Latinos like in Florida, where the Trump campaign did an excellent job in trying to portray socialism and trying to get the Cuban and Venezuelan voters to vote a certain way. Again, just like because all they have is like a tunnel vision for the way that when they hear these words. I think also our Latino voting bloc, we're very close to when it comes to religion, is something that's very close to many Latinos. We also see that we have groups of Latinos, again, with tunnel vision, that we see once they see pro-choice or pro-gay rights, it's an immediate vote for someone who would go against these type of policies. Again, like a vote for Trump in this case. It's something that we must be able to, we all need to be understanding that Latinos are all different. We're not all cut from the same, we don't all fit in one frame.
Yes. And that brings me to Uyen, because Julian Castro was speaking earlier today with Alicia Menendez on a show, and he talked about, every 4 years, there's this rah-rah-rah about how Texas is gonna turn blue. And a lot of weight is put in the minority vote in Texas to turn it blue, but not a lot of resources are spent in that community along the border. So he talked about an ignored community in Texas, which is the Asian community. And I think that overall in in the United States, we don't talk a lot about the impact that the Asian American community is having on our electorate. I know that Action Together New Jersey focuses on suburban voters, but you're also a very strong voice for that community in New Jersey and across the country. So, I mean, how do you see the role that this community play, and the role that Action Together New Jersey play in turning suburban women to vote blue?
So I'm going to split that into two different things, because they're completely different. One is just the Asian, right? The Asian vote. So the Asian vote is much like what Emmy said about the Latino vote. We're not monolithic, and we can say that basically about every group. The Asian vote in particular is difficult in that it requires substantial funding to do the research, to do the data, because, just take my home country of Vietnam, for example, not to mention China, Korea's, Thailand, just Vietnam. The differences in the Vietnamese Americans in the United States from Vietnam, how they vote and how they are on our US political spectrum really depends on where their family came from in Vietnam. North Vietnam, Central Vietnam, South Vietnam. When did they immigrate? Which wave of immigration? Pre-1975 or after? We're just starting to see data in the Vietnamese community, and then we have some Chinese and Koreans as well, where we see there's age strata as far as how they're voting. So, which actually mirrors the US as a whole. The younger generation tend to be more progressive, tend to go for more racial justice, social justice, dismantling systemic racism. We see that in the 30 and below. And then the older generation tend to be more conservative. So that's just in the Asian, group altogether. And I think I would also say that Asians in general have been largely apolitical. And I think you need to look at different countries. For example, obviously Vietnam and communism and the Vietnam War. And then you have major countries that violate major human rights, like China, for example, and you have centuries of oppression of the people. So they are taught and ingrained not to talk about government, right?
Yeah.
Or in those countries, there's no trial, you're going and you're gone and you disappear. So I think there's so many ways we can go down the rabbit hole with Asians in general. But I think
it seems to me that you are talking about the cultural sensitivity and understanding that all voters of color need. And the fact that they need somebody like you making decisions about how to talk to those voters rather than just translating a general message, which is another box. But I wanted to intervene that because we talked about that same difference in the Latino vote. You had another part of your question around suburban.
Okay, so our group started, organically with the suburban white women. That's the majority, and we're all over the state. We're pretty balanced between North Jersey and South Jersey. Central Jersey, not so much. And there is a Central Jersey, by the way. But yeah, we actually have a strong group in South Jersey, which I love. I love it because New Jersey politics, as you can imagine, leans heavily to the north. And so I love seeing the grassroots down in South Jersey. And we have a lot of progressives down there. So that's really promising. As far as getting them involved, I think we all woke up at the 2016 election at the same time. I don't think New Jersey is that much more different than other states that we've seen across the US. And I really do think that the suburban women, it's up to them to educate themselves and to get involved. And to the extent that I can help them and not just them, but I am learning along in this whole process. Arlene can vouch to that. When I first started, I didn't know squat about politics and the divisions here. So yeah, we are just all learning along. And right now we have been focused for 3 years on vote by mail to get out the vote. And that's what really our focus has been, is on vote by mail as a method to increase voter participation and increase voter access throughout the state.
I want to do a shout out because Action Together New Jersey was critical on the legislation that made vote by mail so much more easier for New Jersey. So thank you for doing all that work and for setting up the pathway to getting here, where we have a vote by mail election, and for the most part, it has gone through without any problems.
Thank you so much.
A really good point, and I kind of want to bring that to the forefront too, because while it is frustrating that we did not have a landslide, and it concerns me because when I look around, I look at what my neighbors might think when they see me, right? Someone that's darker skinned, my kids are darker skinned, and that is very, very upsetting and very depressing. But one thing that is actually, I think, a positive is that we have had, so we've been doing this, 20 plus years at this point. And so I think the movement that we've seen over the last 3.5 years with Trump taking the presidency is people wanting to be engaged. Things like what Uyen was able to do and get women more involved in this process to understand that politics just means you care about your community and need to be involved on a day-to-day basis. Not crazy heavily like we are, but certainly going out to the polls to vote. So I think the one thing that we have, because we didn't have a landslide, is I think people realize that we are a divided country and there is a lot of work to be done, regardless of who is the president, regardless of who is the vice president. I think that is definitely one positive that I am taking from this, because it means that I don't have to worry about all these people that got involved in the last 3.5 years deciding to go back to sleep, because we can't afford it. We just can't. I think we see where we are now. And I think it's because of that inactivity before. that we need to now make sure that those same people are still in this for the long term, right? We need them to continue to be involved and continue to be part of this process, because without these people involved, we're going to be exactly where we are today in another 4 years. So I think that is definitely a positive to take away from this. We worked hard in this election cycle. We will win this presidency, this vice presidency, and then we will just continue to work to continue to chip away on the local level and on the state level to make sure that the elected officials we put into office that do go on to national office represent what we actually believe in as a country.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that how do we stay engaged with all the communities that we represent is critical to making sure that our issues get addressed. And I want to come back to Imani, because I think one issue that will continue to be a point of contention, even if Biden wins, is how do we change the politics and the emphasis on economic and racial justice issues in this country. I was looking at the national exit polls, and the number one reason a lot of young people voted, or just people in general, was the state of the economy and racial inequality. Those were the top issues that they were voting on. And I was also impressed with the number of young people who came out and vote. And I think that we got to give some credit to the fact that Bernie and Ocasio-Cortez and all those in that group were turned that Bernie energy into young voters to stay engaged. So how do we sort of make sure that the issues that matter to them and stay forefront on the agenda of Biden? If, once he gets declared, I think the Georgia numbers got closer just now. But, if we are on the other side, we still need to push the Senate and push the House to be more progressive. So let's go back to how do we keep young people engaged and how do we push this country forward?
Sure. So you actually said something a little bit earlier that I want to dig into a little bit deeper. You were saying, it's important to hire folks who look like the people we're trying to outreach to, look like and understand the cultures of all the voters we're trying to outreach to. And I would say that that's half the battle, right? Hiring folks who look like those folks or who come from the same culture, that's half the battle. The other battle is actually empowering them to make decisions. Because you can have a whole staff full of people of color. You can have a whole full staff of Latinas. You can have a whole staff of Black folks. And if you are not empowering them to make real decisions, if you're not empowering them to actually tell you the truth about what their community wants and doesn't want, not just what people in power want to hear, if that's not happening, we're still going to lose. That's just hands down, bar none. So that's for one thing. We have to hire folks from these communities and actually empower them to tell the truth about their communities, and not, punish them for going against the powerful white guy in the room. Yeah. So that's number one. Number two is, as far as the candidates we run, we have to stop running these boring candidates, man. We cannot run like, the suburban mom dog catcher who is middle-aged and does not speak to folks in urban communities or communities of color. We can't keep running the middle of the road military person. These people, nobody wants to see that anymore. We don't want that. People want folks who are full throttle and going for really progressive things. One of the things that is interesting, if you're looking at the turnout across the country, is that progressive issues actually did pretty good. $15 minimum wage passed in Florida. We had a bunch of drug policy reform things passed. We also had in Michigan, they flipped their Supreme Court to be Democratic. So, we're having these types of wins, but they're not matching the political wins as far as who we're sending to Congress. And that's partially because, for one reason or another, establishment Dems think that this middle of the road person is what inspires people to come out to vote for them. And it absolutely is not. So what the establishment needs to start doing is really investing its time in true progressives who look, sound, and come from the same communities and can really speak to the communities that they need to win to come out to vote to get these seats. Otherwise, we're just going to keep.
Yes, I was reading, my guy Chuck Rocha. He tweeted today about how none of the races across the country congressional races or Senate races that we were running had people of color running them. And so to your point about who is actually working and learning to actually run and make decisions of what the message is, that is key. And I think as the demographics change, we need to be a little bit more demanding of the established Democrats to not just run more people of color for office, but also to hire them and give them the contracts to run campaigns. And I know, Arlene, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you are our New Jersey Democratic state voice in there. And this is an issue that weighs heavy on me on every election. The few people of color actually in charge of budgets for GOTB, in charge of messaging for elections. So, I mean, any wisdom on how we change those dynamics?
So Patricia and I talk about this often, and I think I am her token establishment person that she allows to be on these things. So whenever I'm in discussions I have true activists, which I consider each of you to be, and I am as well, but I have a point where I have my chair hat and I look to see who is going to win. And I look to see what the numbers look like, and I see who is the best person to do that. And so I haven't necessarily seen yet that the candidate that is the most progressive is the winning candidate. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm right. I could be off base. I totally could be. But I think one of the things that I'm looking for, obviously in Hunterdon County, I want any candidate that wants to run and can win. But I think some of the things that unfortunately all of our communities don't invest in is the Democratic Party. I just don't see them on the local level, right? And so we need more people to get involved, more younger people to get involved, because that is how you run. And I can understand wanting to change the process. But guess what? That's not happening yet, right? So let's figure out how to do parallel tracks if you want. You can change the process from the outside, but let's work on the inside as well and figure out how we get more people to be part of this process. Because when I'm looking at people that want to run for office, I need people to do that, right? I need people that are part of this process, people that I know, that have invested time, that have done the door knocking, that, we feel comfortable with. And I know that's hard for some people to understand, but it is part of it, right? Yeah. Just like anybody you would recommend for a job or something like that, you would want to know who they are and what they're about. So I know I'm your token. I get it.
You're not my token. You're not my token. I want to clarify what you are. As for all of us to understand the political game, and I'm going to give the voice to Imani next. I think that we have to be okay with having an inside strategy and an outside strategy. And I do believe that long-term change happens from the inside and happens from the outside. And for me, you are our voice in the Democratic Party and someone who is connected to the community, so is able to listen to it. So, and you're just an awesome Latina, so whenever I can, I just elevate you. But there was a question that came through on Facebook from Maria del Cid. Thank you, Maria, for watching us. She is a coordinator for the Latino Caucus of the Democratic Party. She's asking, given that we are demanding younger candidates and progressive candidates and women of color to run, who would you all like to see as the next leader of the Democratic Party, nationally, and even here in New Jersey? We can start with Emmy or Uyen.
So wait, Patricia, wait. I just don't want to get too far ahead because there are some things that we certainly really should address.
Okay, sure.
Especially and it actually speaks to Maria's question about running younger folks. Arlene said something very interesting about, it has to be people that she knows and people who she's seen knock on doors. This is a democracy. Why is it that we have machine bosses only who can look and say, well, it has to be somebody I know, right? And if we're talking about changing things internally, one thing we have internally here in New Jersey that literally is not internal to any other state in the country is our ballot line. So if we want to change things internally and get more young folks, more progressive, more people of color, why are we putting the onus on people to come out and knock on doors for candidates that they don't support or get cozy with machine elite when we could just get rid of the line and then have folks run their own campaigns, right? So I think we definitely have some internal stuff to fix. But if we really, really want people of color, if we really want working class people, if we really want people that really speak to the demographics that we want to fight for the people that really need it once they get into office, we need to get rid of the ballot line. Like, we need to get rid of the ballot line, and we need to get rid of this culture that you have to kind of pledge, essentially, like you're pledging for a frat or a sorority, in order to, you know, be able to have a fair chance to run. So we gotta get rid of the line, we gotta get rid of the culture. It just doesn't make any sense. And to Maria's question, I want to see somebody run the party who absolutely believes in democracy in every facet, not just kind of like the pre-approved thing, but things like abolishing the line, things like ranked choice voting. Those things of those nature that really can help boost our democracy and therefore help boost folks who have historically been left out.
Yeah. Charles Stiles, I think, in column today wrote that Democrats in New Jersey are taking a victory lap because of the number of voters that came out and voted predominantly Democrat in places like Somerset and even here in Hunterdon County, Arlene. And I always said that one of the reasons we have been able to grow the Democratic Party in New Jersey is because we have been very inclusive. But one thing that Charles Stiles talked is that the reason why we're winning in suburban counties is because more voters of color are moving to suburbia, more women are voting. So how do we capitalize on how do we communicate with suburban voters, progressive suburban voters, to get engaged directly in the party politics so that we can create a party that is more inclusive of voters of colors and of women? And Uyen, I'll go to you because I know you spend a lot of time talking to suburban voters, and then Imani, you can complete on how do we engage voters of color in the suburban areas.
So as far as getting these activists to be involved, so we had what's called the 3 tracks. Our first track is to fix democracy from within. So we literally have hundreds of county committee seats in the mostly Democratic Party. I don't think there were many that joined the Republican Party. Our group organically, you know, they lean Democrats, although we do have, I believe we have about under 4% of self-described Republicans. And then we have like 12% independents, but the rest of us are self-identified as Democrats. And so I said, listen, if you really want to fix democracy and there's many things you can do, but the first thing that you want to do is join the party that you want and be a county committee chair. So we went through Civics 101, Politics 101. But I want to just address Imani's critique on the ballot and the line. So there's different schools of thoughts on that. And the way that we have approached it is I looked at the system. And as an immigrant, a recent, not too recent, you know, I forget how many years, 3 decades or something I've been here, I forget. But anyways,
I know the feeling.
Sorry, guys. It was really frustrating for me, coming from a country where we don't have free and fair elections. Literally, in Vietnam, our candidates win with 100% of the vote. And that's because you're going to vote and they're going to stand right there as you're voting and they take your vote. So I know what it's like to be in a country where you don't have fair and free elections. Then I come to this country and I find out, oh my God, they have freedom. What is that about? And it was making me really ill that our participation rates were so low. That's why it got me into vote by mail. I'm like, I actually, when I lived as an expat in Vietnam, my then husband had a country job, and I voted for from abroad using our overseas ballot system, which is fixing to come in right now, right? Our overseas and military voters, those votes are coming in. That's how I voted. And I'm like, don't we have this in New Jersey? We should have this. Lo and behold, we had no excuses, absentee voting or vote by mail. And so I said, okay, this is the method that's going to expand voter access. And so what is great about this whole argument about the anti-democratic nature of the implicit bias of the line, right? It is an implicit bias. What paper ballots in New Jersey in particular does is that it gets rid of that implicit bias by giving the voters 45 days to look at the entire ballot from two ways. The voters have the extra time to look at all the candidates and on the other side, all the ballot questions, right? Because the interpretive statements are no clearer for the voters. They're very, very confusing. So time always benefits voters, and New Jersey is the outlier of all the states in the US that we get it 45 days before Election Day. We have 45 days to study everything on the ballot and 45 days to vote using a paper ballot that's trackable. The second thing is the implicit bias of the line happens because of our voting machines. They are outsized. So the paper ballot that's printed to fit that outsized ballot is bigger in scale. So when you enter, and especially if there's a line behind you of voters, you don't want to be the one holding up the line. You feel pressure. That's the first, people don't really look at their sample ballots, to be honest. You're looking at it at the same time. And if you're looking at the ballot at that outside scale, think of it, if anyone has a big screen TV at home, there are optical measurements that they say for this space, you want this size screen. You don't want bigger because you can't see everything, right? And you don't want it too small because then your screen, the same thing with the ballot. So what happens is when you send a paper ballot to someone that is scalable to hold at arm's length, they can see everything on the ballot, and the line, the implicit bias of the line disappears, not all, but a little bit. But when you're in that voting booth, what your eyes do is you try to make sense of it. Okay, where am I looking at? And that's where the implicit bias of the line helps the voter. Okay, I see the top of the ticket of this party. This national party is well known. I kind of know their platform. I'm assuming all these candidates are running on that platform. I'm just going to vote down the line. I'm done. I'm not holding up the line. I can go. So there are ways that I'm trying to work around the systemic biases with voting and the election infrastructure in general to minimize that.
There's studies that say that the line gives incumbents a 30% benefit on voter count on election day. So that's why those of us who are interested in getting younger voters, younger candidates to run, and even us in Lupe, PAC, who want new candidates to run, have to really challenge the whole idea of the line. But
and Patricia,
but I do agree with you when that there is a change in the dynamics when we get a vote by mail ballot. But we in the who work with immigrant workers or who work in urban centers had a big concern with the vote by mail ballot, and I want Emmy to address that because I know she did some of this work with some of the people she worked with around. How do you educate urban voters and perhaps low-wage, not so educated voters that are not in urban to vote by mail? Emmy?
Yeah, most definitely. So I think one of the important things is we have to be on the ground with them, right? That was a failure. That's what happened in Florida due to COVID-19. We know that to address like Latino voters, you also have to be on the doors with them, speaking to them, and virtually, it just makes things a lot harder to get to Latino, especially Latino voters in Florida. And now coming to New Jersey, in terms of getting a vote by mail, I mean, just personal stories of folks that shared, coming from failed systems and specifically like in Peru and Latin America. Peru specifically is a country, where we have like presidents that have been either imprisoned or have been out of the country. It's not the most best example of democracy at all. So folks from Latin America know this, how systems could be rigged. And so basically there was, but it looks like not, but a mistrust in the system. But I think that our voters, we have to become more educated through, again, grassroots organizations. Us at the job that I'm currently at 32BJ, right? We educated our members through like a lot of mass media, like getting to them, like text messages, and getting directly to them through social media, educating them on how to fill out their ballots, to also flip the ballots, very important. That was one of the things how we got marijuana legalization, right, and passed just recently. So it's just informing the voters, being out there with them. And because, again, a lot Latino voters have a lot of mistrust in the system, especially coming from the countries that they came back. I also want to address, Patricia, though, a few of the things. I saw Maria's question about policies. Two of the biggest policies I do want to get to this is, we have a racial we live in a racist America. So definitely upon Joe Biden hopefully getting into the White House in January, one of the first things he could address is passing a bill, basically a racial justice bill. There's one that passed earlier in the House this year, something that would address all the issues right now that are affecting our folks of color and our Black sisters and brothers. Also, immigration is a big thing. He promised on his day one, of course not technically, but we do want to see a very robust system in which he was going to address the nearly 12 million undocumented immigrants in the country. And all this is going to get done. I don't think it's something that it's just going to be brought to us like, here, thank you for voting for me. Here's everything to fix what Donald Trump has done in the last 4 years. Rather, it's something that we must continue to push through grassroots organization. We saw in Detroit, Michigan, the Black vote, how it came out. We saw in Arizona also, because of SB 1070, the reaction of the Latino voters too, right? The highest racial, the most anti-immigrant legislation, most highly racial profiling legislation, and it mobilized a lot of our members. So things like that, right? We should not wait to continue to be impacted, but rather we should learn from our past history, what has been done to us, and continue to mobilize, continue to organize, inform our voters on the ground, and get better on doing this Zoom thing, get better on hosting events like this, get better folks to get more involved. I'm telling you, folks like my mother, my mother and my father, they to get on Zoom, it's difficult. So we have to be very culture sensitive about what it is that they understand. If it's more Facebook Lives where they just have to do a one click to learn more, but rather than having a Zoom meeting ID and passcode, right? Then let's do it. Let's get this information more easily accessible to all of them for all of these topics.
I want to acknowledge that is absolutely right. One of the tools that I use over and over again is when, Arlene, you made that video showing your father, your Puerto Rican father, how to vote by mail. I thought that was brilliant because you were so kind and helpful to him, and I was like, oh, I need to show that to my dad. Because the whole fear of, am I doing it right? I think that just educating people how to do it. So simple things like that we do for our community.
It's funny because if you were able to watch the whole thing, one of the things my dad kept asking is, that's a Democrat, right? I'm like, yes, Dad, that's who we supported. That's who we endorsed, right? So there's something to be said, and not to go back to the conversation about the line, but there's something to be said about that, right? People want to know that it's instilled in them that it's like, okay, is that a Democrat? Because I'm like, okay, that's a good one, right? So for my dad, that was his only question to me. And I'm like, yes, of course, Dad, here it is. And if you watch, I didn't even tell him who to vote for. It was very clear he did it on his own. But it's, I just, for me, when I look at who is going to be involved in the party, what I'm looking for is younger people to be involved in the party, right? Go through the process, start talking to because to me, it doesn't, being involved in politics doesn't mean you're like kissing someone's ring or doing anything like that. It means you care enough about your community, care enough about your neighbors that you're willing to put time into this, right? Because that's what it takes. It takes time. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here now, not with my 3 kids, hanging with them and doing homework with them tells you something, right? It's what Uyen is doing. It's what Emmy's doing. It's what Emmy's doing. So it's like they're because I've heard this for 20 years, right? Of people that can't be involved. They don't have time to be involved. Well, I only have 24 hours in my day too. And I still make the time to be involved because my community means enough to me that the fact that I'm sitting as the only Latina county chair, I don't do that because it gives me anything. I don't get contracts. No one kisses my ring. I do it because I am the only Latina in the Democratic Party when I sit in those rooms, right? So when they're talking about issues that affect our community, at the very least, I am sitting there to say, wait a minute, let's make sure we got that right, guys? Let's make sure that we're not going to cause an issue or a backlash because you're not speaking to the community itself and you're just assuming what you think you know. So, it's, for me, I'm looking for more younger and younger people to get involved in this process and to be part of what we're doing so that they can continue to be our chairs, be our county chairs, be our chairs of the party at the state level, be the national Democratic chair for the entire country. That's what I'm looking for.
So Arlene and I have this argument all the time about how do we change the ability of new candidates to running. I say we have to have open primary elections. If you don't want to change the line, give me open primaries. But we don't agree. I still respect her opinion, and I still think that her voice in there is important. But we need to figure out how to change those dynamics. So I want to go back to New Jersey, and I want to go back to what we were able to achieve in New Jersey, not just because we voted heavily Democrat, but other things that are critical to communities of color because it addressed racial equity issues. Like we were able to legalize the cannabis. That was a big victory. And I know that that's an issue, Imani, that really matter, that you really care about because it impacts negatively a lot of our African-American community and our urban Latino youth. So let's talk about what that victory means in relation to what does it mean for the Democratic Party also to be more inclusive of our issues, because we've been demanding legalization and change in that issue for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so before I get to that, it is very bold. And I respect Arlene, but it's very bold of her to assume that people who are not involved specifically with the Democratic Party are not involved with their community. Those are two different things, like completely. You could be very involved in your community, doing grassroots work, doing mutual aid work, doing political education work. You could be doing a whole lot of work in your community that isn't necessarily flowing through the Democratic Party. And it's extremely, extremely bold to assume and then to make decisions for people, right? Not people are making decisions for themselves. The party leadership is making decisions on who runs. To then assume that those folks are not involved at all simply because they aren't doing it through the Democratic Party, right? Like, this is America. This is New Jersey. New Jersey is a state in America. In America, you should have the freedom to look around your community, say, I actually don't like the leadership here. I actually don't like what's being done in XYZ. I don't like what's being done ABC. And you should be able to run without anything obstructing you, because that's what the Constitution says. That's literally what was hammered into our lives. It's literally why people come here from other places, because they think we have a democracy. The line is not a good democracy. There's no reason I should have to get to know big wigs in the party in order to have a fair chance to run for office. Where did show me that in the Constitution? Show me that.
There's a whole movement to eliminate the line.
And here's the thing. Hold on. Now I'm going to relate it to the cannabis question. Yeah. We had elected officials. In this state, cannabis legalization was over 60%. Over 60% of the voters in favor of it. It's something like 64%, right? In favor of legalization. Our line benefiting legislators couldn't get a bill passed on it because we had legislators who were saying things that were just frankly crazy, things that have been debunked for years. Marijuana ruins your mind. Marijuana ruins families. I'm not for it. And then we had people who wouldn't push for it, all because of political games. And those are people who benefit from our ballot line. Now imagine if we got rid of that line and we had true progressives who could really run, and they could run without having to pledge a sorority or fraternity, Democratic, and could actually, get out there and have a fair chance. We might have just been that didn't have to put legalization of marijuana to a referendum. We could have been the state that did it through legislation and had equitable aspects to it. We could have included expungement. We could have included taxing so that we could go to communities that were negatively impacted by the war on drugs. But instead, we have a whole bunch of lackluster legislators who benefit from the line and are going to continue to benefit from the line simply because loyalty takes over expertise in this city. Getting involved in the Democratic Party, no matter whether they're right or wrong, just being involved and being able to be quiet and just be yes men, that's what gets you on the line. And that gets us things like not having a bill pass on marijuana, even though the voters love it. They would have loved to have that.
So there is, yeah. So I agree that it took too long. We should have done it by legislation, and but we now got it done. But what is next in terms of fixing the social justice inequality of the fact that we legalized marijuana, but we didn't rescind some of the costs that it had on our young African-American youth and our urban youth. So what is the next step? And I know, Arlene, you work very hard on the legalization process, and I want to highlight everybody to the NJ.com profile on Arlene, because she was one of the people who worked on the legislation a long time ago. But I wanted to say, what is next in terms of correcting the injustice of a long-term policy of criminalizing possession of marijuana by Black and Latino and urban youth? And when I want to go to you, because it's important for me how suburban voters, and women feel about this issue. So can you, Arlene or Imani, take the question of what is next? How are we going to get rid of the impact that this law had for so many years in Black and brown youth in urban centers?
So I'm really excited to deal with cannabis, considering that, I've been trying to work on this issue for the last 10 years. And so I think that we've made so much progress in 10 years. And I know it is frustrating to have 120 elected officials, but they are elected officials that were voted in by their constituents, right? So they're responsible to be there. They're responsible to make the laws. And while we wish they could agree on every issue, it's just not reality. That's just a simplistic view of politics. And so while it's taken a long time, this is where we are, right? So we got to take this referendum and we got to use it to make sure that it actually produces the result we want, which is to ensure that our community isn't put in jail for having weed, marijuana, cannabis, whatever you want to call it, right? Because I've been involved since the time when it was called weed. And so, to me, it's an exciting process that we have gone through, in the sense of I'm an attorney, right? And so when I started working on this over 10 years ago, this was something that attorneys weren't involved in because it was so new. It was this area where you were making the law and creating it with legislators at the time. And so I'm excited to see what this is going to look like. Remember, we have a very long process ahead of us in terms of making sure that we have a law that passes, that sets out what these regulations will look like. And we still have the process of the decriminalization side of it, right? So when you have cannabis and you have the companies that are going to be coming in to deal with this, we're trying to look for companies in New Jersey. And it's hard because you can't say you have a company with experience, because there's only 12 that have experience in New Jersey because they have licenses. And so you have to figure out a mechanism where you can have people from New Jersey that perhaps have been involved in the cannabis industry, but not necessarily on the legal side of it, and figure out how to integrate them in the process, right? Because that is really what we're trying to do. We're trying to take this from behind the shadows and bring it to the forefront so that people can be involved in the process, right? So this is an industry that's going to make a significant amount of money. And so we want to ensure that our people are part of that too. We've suffered long enough for decades and decades because of this law. So we want to make sure that we're part of that process and part of making sure that it is a windfall for everyone across the board. And I am curious to see what Uyen is thinking, and Emmy, because when you're dealing with an issue that I'm not sure what it is like in the suburban areas. I know what it's like in Hunterdon. My people are all for it in the suburban areas, but I would be curious to hear what you're hearing over there too.
So for me, I think there's a great injustice here, because the kids in the suburbs are lighting it up. So it's not, but they're not being affected like the kids, like the Black kids or the brown kids in the urban areas. So I think for me, I'm still looking and struggling with the structural aspects of whether it's cannabis or decriminalization of marijuana, those low-level offenses and whatnot, I'm still looking at the structure of it, because to Imani's point, where we had, was it polling over 60%, reaching 70% on cannabis, right? But yet we couldn't pass it through the legislature. And I know that the next task on cannabis itself, Senator Rice is a key person there that we have to influence. And so my question is, for things that are overwhelmingly popular with New Jersey voters are not able to have that ballot question on the ballot. And why is that? And other states, they can put those questions on the ballot as citizens, right? And I want to study other states to see what is the process and how they're going to do it and why we cannot do it here. So I think, you know, specifically to marijuana, it definitely affects the suburbs. I mean, let's not joke here. The disparity, the huge disparity in the offenses that's being committed right now in the suburbs. But I'm looking structurally to see what we can do moving forward. And I think I think those of us who are in the decision making, you know, I'm just an advocate, you know, I am the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. So it really frustrates me to have to talk the ears off of the decision makers, but to the extent to whatever platform that I have or political will or power that I have, which is tiny, what I'd say is, if you're in the position to make a difference, like for example, when we had Congressman, the last cycle, Malinowski, Andy Kim, and Mikey Sherrill. So I was advising them, and I said, listen, I want 51% of your line positions to be women. I want you to go look for them. I want you specifically line positions. I don't want staff. I want line positions, especially your campaign manager, to be a woman. And I want you to look for women of color. And so that was my request to them. I got 2 out of 3 of the candidates, and they worked really hard, and I believed them. So I tried to influence in whatever arena that I'm doing to make sure that women are at the table, and that women of color specifically are at the table. In my leadership team, I recruit women of color because I am one. And so I want them to mirror me, right? And what I'm looking at. And so with the legislation, so we have Democrat upper house, lower house, and the executive branch, right? You think it would be easy to get those ballot drop boxes? Let me tell you how hard it was. I started back in February and just plugged away. And I'm like, why is it so hard? Y'all are Democrats. You are the party of voter expansion. Why am I going back to data? Okay, let me give you this data again and why we need to have it. And so I don't think just because you're blue or red that you're going to act a certain way as a legislator. I work with every legislator who will return my call or who will talk to me, because I'm not counting their vote until I've got their vote. And I think on the cannabis issue, Senator Rice's name comes up again and again, where we need to get him on board. And there are several other legislators that we are going to have to get on board to get us to the next step, because Imani, you're right. That should have been passed already with the legislature that we have. And the fact that it had to go through a ballot question really makes me question about what kind of democracy we have here in New Jersey.
One of the things that I want to elevate from you is the whole idea that
we definitely don't have one. That's the real critical thing here is, like, when you have voters that over 60% are saying, please give me a thing. And then you have representatives who are like, no. In a representative democracy, that does not make sense. And I argue that, you know, sometimes politicians are going to do what they do and have different choices. But at the point where you have something that's only over 60% and the party is putting up people to be on this highly undemocratic line who won't even listen to voters, that is a huge issue.
I wanna say that I wanna elevate, and I agree with you, Imani, that we have a lot of work to do structurally to change access and inclusivity on the Democratic Party in New Jersey, and also nationally. The whole idea that we can win the popular vote in the United States and then have to fight for electoral votes. It's like it's very difficult to like understand how to do that. So I with the acknowledgement that we have a lot of work to do in our democracy, I want to elevate that one of the reasons that I started this show about Activista Rise Up is to elevate what Wynn is just talking about, the importance of activism at the local level in demanding change from elected officials. And sometimes it's long, it's tiring, but we have to figure out how to keep the momentum, to keep that kind of commitment to demanding change happening from activists across the board. I want to have one last question for Emmy, and then we're almost around the hour. And I know that the five of us can talk for a long time, and we can agree and disagree and have more wine. But I don't want to keep everybody here. But one of the things that, that we sort of had to figure out, in our activism, in our vision of how we change our parties so more inclusive and more diverse. How do we run candidates? Republicans copy us from 2016 and 2018, and they run a lot of Republican women, and they actually took away some of our seats from middle of the road Democrats. It didn't happen in New Jersey, but it happened somewhere else. So there is a lesson to learn there about about not just running a candidate because it might just fit the right message, but running the right candidate, right? So I want to elevate that. But Emmy, urban voters are very wary, and immigrant voters very wary about cannabis legalization. So how do we move on that point there? But also, Democrats are in control in New Jersey. Biden is going to be, hopefully, the lead is close, and if he wins, and when we win, how do we make sure that this party, that is our party? I am a Democrat. I criticize the Democrats for not being inclusive. I criticize the county chairs for whatever the shenanigans they do for not allowing our candidates to run and win. But I am a Democrat, and what Ocasio-Cortez says is that this is our party, and we will define how we participate in this party, but we have to participate. So how do we make sure that immigrants and urban voters and voters of color have a stake and demand a response from Democrats in New Jersey and nationally?
Yeah, Patricia. So just to close out, I know before you address, I know Arlene also wanted to hear real quick on the marijuana. Definitely marijuana, one, how to address it to that some of the Latinos, specifically immigrant population, were a little wary about that subject. In just near conversations that I had, it's always just come across a racial equity piece. That's just a racial justice issue, something that has been broken for years, like Imani and Arlene said, and it's just increased in the last decades. And then we're seeing how our Black sisters and brothers continue to get arrested at a higher rate, of course, than our white counterparts, especially here in New Jersey in comparison to states like Texas or New York too. So definitely continue to drive that racial equity, the broken windows theory, make our folks understand why it is that we voted yes on marijuana and why, why we voted yes on marijuana. In terms of getting our folks, again, it's going to be, being a long struggle to get Vice President Biden and our soon-to-be Vice President Harris onto the White House, but it's going to continue to be a struggle. There's going to be the fact that we did not win with the landslide says a lot of things as well. We have, I think, right now 69 million and counting people in the United States who continue, despite Trump's immoral and unethical standards, continue to stand by him. That just says a lot, right? And in order to secure the next 4 years, I'm just worried a lot about what limitations the next administration may have. But just like our Black Lives Matter movement made changes, just like the March for Our Lives movement made changes, just like immigrants stood up all over the country trying to say no to the kids in the border, we must continue to rise up. And if we have to continue to take it to the streets, we must continue being there. We must continue to, now that we learned that there's a new way to mobilize and to organize digitally, let's use this tool to do that. Let's find in our progressive young millennials that came out in millions, in record numbers, let's continue to get them more involved and lead. Because again, these are the folks, we as Latinos, I think differently than the older generation Latinos Latinos in my family, and I'm sure the same is for my my sisters here on in this broadcast as well. So again, I think that we have to continue to know that there's many young Latino progressive voting bloc, and let's also pay attention to them and know that they can also help change the mindset of other folks in their families. And this doesn't only go for Latinos, this goes for Blacks, Asians as well, right? Because our older generation tend to be more conservative, either because of their beliefs or the systems that they grew up in back in their countries of origin. But again, continue to organize is, that's how we start. We start all at the grassroots level. It doesn't go from the top down, as many things say, it goes from the bottom up is how we build.
Yeah, thank you, Emmy. Any closing thoughts, Imani, how do we do this cross-generational, how do we build this allyship across many different, I always said that people don't have to agree with everything I say, but we have to build a vision of inclusion on our party. So how do we, some closing thoughts, or how do we continue to work for inclusivity in our party?
Well, we definitely have to have the representation that we've been talking about, throughout this entire show. And not just representation when it comes to skin tone, not representation only when it comes to genitalia, but also representation when it comes to the issues that people want fixed. We really need to lean into those. We need to not shy away because, something that was suggested, earlier today and kind of, lit just kind of the entire political sphere on fire was the suggestion that Black Lives Matter and defund the police are why people are losing seats in Middle America. Well, Black people are never going to stop calling for our rights. We're never going to stop defending our lives simply because the Democrats cannot win seats in Middle America because they're not doing a good job at campaigning, right? So we need to really lean into the issues that we know our base cares about and that our base will come out and push. We saw, recently with Ed Markey's race, the amount of youth that got behind that man because of the Green New Deal. We want youth involved. Why don't we, campaign on things and actually work on legislation on things that youth care about, right?
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. We need to stop holding on like cats, on a curtain to these old ideas of what somebody who is electable looks like. We need to stop holding on to these old ideas of, oh, these aren't policies that people don't want to hear about. It's scary to them. We need to stop doing that and actually look at the data and look at the people who are winning, right? Like all the squad came back.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happened in Middle America, but the squad came back, right?
Yes, the squad.
We need to make sure that we're really speaking to folks on every level in ways that are relatable to them, not just on the surfacey things, but also when it comes to policy.
So before I go to Uyen, I want to give you space to give some closing remarks on the same question. When one of the things that is amazing to me is how Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, all those voters that we are counting on to deliver a Democratic vote are voters of color. So what we need to push for is that after Biden wins, that we demand inclusivity on what the party looks like and where they spend the resources. And I hope that all of you, all of us who have different hats and play different roles in this movement, we continue to remember how do we defeat this this message of separating what America is all about. So, Uyen, any closing thoughts on this discussion? So that in bringing I love it. I love all of you. I said I could talk all night with all of you.
So I am so honored to be on this panel, to have all these viewpoints. Listen, I love this country. I've been to 49 states, and Alaska is going to be my next one. And I grew up pretty much in the Midwest, all the vowel states, Ohio, Indiana, Oklahoma. So I tend to come from areas where the pocketbook issues really speak to those voters. And I have to say that it's, as an immigrant to this great country who loves this great country so much, I see the systemic, structural unfairness of it all. And I think Dave Chappelle is my favorite historian. He's beyond comedian. He's just brilliant. But he said something that has just stuck with me for years, and that is, how is it that we were able in South Africa to get rid of apartheid? They struggled in that society for so long. How was it that they were able to push it off the edge? And I think it's comparable to the issue of systemic racism here in the United States. And he said at some point they had critical mass. And I think we're reaching, or if not, we're at critical mass where everybody, the vast majority, and there's definitely the minority who are just digging in their heels, but they see systemic racism, structural, they see the unfairness of it, whatever you want to call it. If they're not going to come right out and say it, but I think we've got critical mass, and that's what's exciting to me, because I think we are at a point in our nation's history where we are going to do the hard work and ripping that Band-Aid off so we can all heal. Because I think the people who are in power see that they are not going to heal and succeed if everyone doesn't succeed, especially our Black brothers and sisters. So I think that moving forward, I think we're going to see a lot of changes here, and it's the young people. And I don't think that they need a push, because all of these activists, they've passed the mic. They're like, here you go. It doesn't take a genius to run for office to serve your community. You just have to want to serve your community.
Yeah, and I think that young people are pushing us to be more bold, to be more courageous, to be more innovative. So, Arlene, any closing thoughts on this conversation and how we can, continue just working together? I think at the end of the day, we all care about our communities, and we have a job to do to elevate our concerns. So, any closing thoughts on this conversation?
Yeah, thank you for again inviting me. It's nice having everyone on here and sharing their different thoughts. And when we all work together, that's actually when we're stronger, right? We can't take each other down because it doesn't help. But when we're working together from the inside and the outside, that's when we actually get change. Because when I have someone like Patricia Campos call me and say, here, Arlene, here's the issue with this legislation. I need you to call that legislator and see how we can fix it. That's the opportunities that we have when we actually partner together and have those conversations. And so it's exciting to see, and it's exciting to have more and more people getting involved. I mean, Hunterdon County, when I started 6.5 years ago as the chair, we had maybe 8 people that were part of the executive board. Now we have a total of 25 because I'm tapped out at 25. I want to say that the majority are women. I want to say that we have decreased the medium age of that by a significant amount. And so that's what it means to be involved, right? It means to change the look of the party and change it from within. And I'm hoping that we can continue to do that as more and more people push, that we do it throughout the entire state, and that we have more and more people that are Black and brown running for office to be part of that process, and to do it on the national level, and to ensure, while this presidential cycle, we've now had a significant number of people actually come out and vote for Biden, right? The most we've ever had in our history of our country. That is absolutely amazing to say. And so we need to take that energy and that activism and make sure that it doesn't go away. And I don't mean by being involved every day in terms of the political process, right? There's so many different ways you can be involved. I've made my choice and made my decision in terms of my involvement, but it's making sure that after Biden wins, come February, that people don't go back to bed, because this election cycle has showed us how much work there is to be done on so many different levels to make sure that we are seen, that we are part of the policy-making process, and that we are actually at the table when these discussions are occurring, so that we can have a voice in those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlene. I want to say that when I moved to Hunterdon County and I started going to Democratic Party meetings, there were just not many young people or people of color. And I remember that Arlene and I have been friends because we were neighbors for a while. And then we became just friends because I respected her role and she respected mine. But I remember that one of the things that I admire is that when we started organizing progressives and we started organizing Bernie Democrats in Hunterdon County, she didn't shut the door for us to be part of the Hunterdon County Democrats. And I think that whole process because she was an outsider and she didn't say, if you're a Bernie person, you cannot be part of the structure of the Hunterdon County Democrats, is what have allowed us to actually get to a high, to now we call it Blue Hunterdon. We're actually turning Hunterdon blue. And I'm proud to have been part of that. And I do think we have a lot of progressive Democrats in Hunterdon County. And one day we are going to be, totally blue, 77%. And we're running good candidates. And I think we can do that. And now, inside, outside strategy, people, I totally believe that. I come from the labor movement. Our currency is organizing and turning out people to have their own voice, but it's also building alliances. So I always say, what is your inside strategy? What's your outside strategy? But we do not win without an outside strategy. And that is why Activista Rise Up exists, to figure out how together we built an outside strategy to build power for voters of color, for working people, for poor people who are struggling in these economic times to survive and to build an economic future that helps their children have a better future than they have. So Activista Rise Up is an opportunity for all of us to be having this conversation together and to elevate the voices of activists of colors, of women of color, and all of us. So I thank you all for joining me. Thank you for engaging in this honest conversation and elevating each other. And we have a lot of work to do. Biden just announced that they have the highest number of votes of any presidential candidate, 73 million votes nationally. That means that people really care about what the future of this country is. But that future has to include the lives and voices of voters of color, of women of color, because our children deserve better than what we have so far. Thank you for engaging with me in Activista Rise Up. I love all the women here. We have a lot of work to do together, and let's support each other, elevate each other, and bring some real changes to our community. I am Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina, and this is Activista Rise Up. Thank you.